Professor Gray stood at the front of the massive lecture hall, his forearms gesturing at the holographic display behind him. The aged alien scales shimmered under the artificial lights as he addressed the 100-plus senior students of the Galactic Academy's most prestigious Sci-Fi class. "Your final assignment," he announced, his translator converting his clicks into standard galactic basic, "is to research and present on one of the 37 species van orders in our history." A quiet murmur spread through the assembled students, representing over 40 different spacefaring races. Most of them already had their minds set on the obvious choices, the notorious collectors who consumed entire civilizations, or the dominators who tried to enslave half the galaxy. In the back row, student Mark, his chosen academic designation, sat quietly. Unlike his classmates who had bright colors and exotic features, he was rather plain-looking with dull brown scales and only 2 eyes. His species, the Tyranners, were known for being methodical and unremarkable. "Remember," Professor Gray continued, "your choice will affect your final standing. Choose wisely." He began listing the banned species on the display, and Mark noticed something odd. While most species had dates and specific reasons listed next to them, one entry simply read, "Humans. Full ban, unanimous council vote." When it came time to submit their choices, Mark watched his classmates scramble for the popular options. The class brain, student first, immediately claimed the collectors. Others rushed to grab the dominators, the mind flayers, and the void walkers. Mark raised his hand last. "I choose humans," he said quietly. The lecture hall fell silent. Professor Gray's upper eyes blinked in surprise while his lower ones narrowed in thought. "Are you certain? The human files are limited. Most students find it difficult to complete a thorough analysis." "Yes, Professor. I'm curious why they're the only species with a unanimous ban vote." A few students snickered. Everyone knew humans were primitive. They barely had faster-than-light travel when they were banned. They weren't particularly strong like the rock crushers, or psychically gifted like the mind flayers. They didn't even have natural weapons or armor. "Very well," Professor Gray said, tapping his datapad. "You'll have access to the standard archives. But..." He paused, all 4 eyes focusing on Mark. "Don't expect to find much. The human files are mostly classified." As the class ended and students filed out, Mark stayed behind, reviewing the public data on humans. Basic vital species, origin planet Earth, achieved spaceflight in their year 1969, made first contact in 2047. Then, in 2051, just 4 years later, every single member of the Galactic Council voted to ban them from participating in any interstellar conflicts. Mark's third stomach churned with excitement. Something didn't add up. How did a species go from first contact to universal ban in just 4 years? And why were most of the files classified? He had no way of knowing then, but his simple choice would lead him to uncover one of the most carefully guarded secrets in galactic history. The real reason humans were considered too dangerous to fight. The central archives of the Galactic Academy stretched 20 levels below ground, each floor more restricted than the last. Mark descended in the gravity tube, his identification chip granting him access to the military history section on level 12. The air was cool and dry to preserve the physical records that complemented the digital archives. Ancient data crystals glowed softly in their protective cases, casting multicolored shadows on the walls. Mark moved past the sections on major galactic conflicts until he reached the smaller section, marked Human Engagements. To his surprise, there were only 3 data crystals, and 2 were marked as restricted. The single accessible crystal contained basic information he already knew: first contact, early trade agreements, and then the sudden ban. Searching for something specific, Mark jumped at the voice. An archive keeper emerged from between the shelves, her crystalline body reflecting the ambient light. Like all librarians, she was a member of the ancient crystal mind species, living databases who served as guardians of knowledge. "Yes," Mark said, showing her his project authorization. I'm researching the human ban, but most files are restricted. The librarian's crystalline form pulsed with soft blue light, their equivalent of thoughtful humming. Interesting choice. Not many look into that particular mystery. She glided closer. Did you know I was there? During first contact with humans. Mark's scales rippled with excitement. Really? What were they like? Unremarkable. At first glance. Soft-bodied, no natural defenses, relatively weak compared to most species. But their eyes, her form flickered. There was something in their eyes that made the council uncomfortable. She moved to a nearby terminal, her crystalline fingers interfacing directly with the system. Your authorization allows access to basic military records. Perhaps start with the Frontier Skirmish. It was humans' first and only military engagement before the ban. The terminal displayed footage from a border dispute between human ships and raiders from the Sigma cluster. Mark watched, confused. The human ships were clearly outdated, their weapons primitive compared to the raiders. Yet somehow, they won. Mark leaned closer to the screen. How? Their ships were inferior in every way. Keep watching, the librarian said. Mark saw it then. The humans weren't winning through superior firepower or technology. They were adapting, learning the raiders' patterns, using their own inferior technology in ways it was never designed for. They turned mining lasers into weapons, cargo holds into trapdoors, and communication arrays into jamming devices. This was just a small border skirmish, the librarian said. But it was enough to worry the council. No species had ever shown such creative combat abilities. She interfaced with another terminal, bringing up more records. If you really want to understand, you need to speak with someone who fought alongside them. There's an instructor at the academy, a veteran of the Coalition Wars. He worked with human military advisors before the ban. Mark's scales tingled with anticipation. Can you tell me more about what happened? The librarian's form dimmed slightly. No, but I suggest you ask him about Operation Broken Mirror. She paused, her crystalline body pulsing with a warning red glow. Be prepared. Some knowledge changes the way you see the universe forever. The combat training facility sat at the edge of the academy grounds, a stark metal structure that contrasted sharply with the elegant spiral towers of the main campus. Mark found Instructor Red in the observation deck, watching junior cadets practice battle formations. The old warrior's battle-scarred exoskeleton showed signs of extensive repair, and one of his sensor arrays was clearly artificial. Like most members of the Guardian species, he had served in numerous conflicts across the galaxy. Operation Broken Mirror, Mark said after introducing himself and his research. Can you tell me about it? The instructor's sensor arrays all turned toward Mark at once, a sign of intense attention among his species. Who told you that name? His voice synthesizer crackled with static, betraying emotion his mechanical body couldn't show. A librarian suggested I ask you about it. Instructor Red turned back to the window. 300 cycles ago, I fought alongside humans. Just once. That was enough. He paused, his mechanical limbs shifting restlessly. They were military advisors, supposedly there to learn from us. We thought we were teaching them. Mark activated his data recorder. What happened? Pirates attacked our supply lines. Disabled our ships with some new weapon we'd never seen before. We were stranded, outgunned, with critical systems failing. Standard protocol was to wait for reinforcements. The instructor's voice grew quieter. The humans suggested something else. They called it asymmetrical warfare. They showed us how to modify our ship's waste disposal system into a weapon, how to turn our environmental controls into a trap. Things no civilized species would even think of. Did it work? Mark asked. Work? Instructor Red's synthesizer produced a sound like harsh laughter. We destroyed the entire pirate fleet, not through superior technology or numbers, but through... He seemed to search for the right word, improvisation. The humans called it thinking outside the box. We called it terrifying. Mark's scales rippled with confusion. But isn't winning good? You don't understand. It wasn't just that they won. It's how easily they adapted to warfare. How quickly they thought of new ways to turn anything into a weapon. The Council had encountered violent species before, but humans. The instructor's sensor arrays dimmed. Humans treated warfare like an art form. But surely other species can adapt too. Not like them. We evolve our technology, improve our strategies, but humans. Instructor Red turned to face Mark fully. In that one battle, they showed us 47 new ways to use our own technology as weapons. 47. And they called it basic field improvisation. The instructor moved closer, his mechanical voice dropping to a whisper. But that's not the worst part. After the battle, they started suggesting improvements. Ways to build ships specifically designed for these conversions. They didn't just adapt to war. They wanted to redesign their entire civilization around the potential for warfare. Is that why they were banned? No. Instructor Red's sensor arrays flickered with what Mark recognized as fear. That came later, after the Council discovered what humans were doing to themselves. If you want to know more, he transmitted a set of coordinates to Mark's pad. These are the locations of sealed combat footage from the Coalition Wars. Be careful. Some knowledge can't be unknown. Mark's hands trembled as he inserted his access card into the sealed archive terminal. The coordinates Instructor Red had given him led to a small, private viewing room deep in the military archives. The room's walls were lined with electromagnetic shielding, designed to prevent any data from leaking out. The first recording started playing. The timestamp showed it was from the early days of the Coalition Wars, before the human man. The footage showed a human military vessel, a converted cargo ship according to the data, facing off against 3 enemy cruisers. Standard tactics would predict a surrender. The archive's AI commented. The human vessel was outgunned 20-1. But the humans didn't surrender. Mark watched in fascination as they vented their cargo holds, creating a cloud of industrial lubricant in space. When the enemy ships fired, their energy weapons ignited the lubricant, creating a massive explosion that disabled their sensors. Clever, Mark muttered, but not terrifying. The next footage made him understand. It showed ground combat, human soldiers fighting alongside alien allies against a superior force. The humans were physically weaker than almost everyone on the battlefield. Their weapons were simple projectile guns and chemical explosives. But they kept winning. They used terrain features no other species would consider as cover. They set traps using simple physics that more advanced races had forgotten about. They threw back grenades, rewired fallen combat drones, and turned the enemy's own defenses against them. Pause playback, Mark said, his scales itching with unease. Show me their combat evolution over time. The AI compiled a timeline. With each battle, the humans adapted. They didn't just learn from their victories. They learned even more from their defeats. Each loss was treated as valuable data, each casualty a lesson to be applied. Display final footage, Mark ordered. The last recording was different. It showed a human military research facility. Scientists were working on something that made Mark's scales turn pale. They were modifying their own soldiers, adding mechanical parts, altering their genetic code, enhancing their neural patterns. This can't be right, Mark whispered. No species would experiment on themselves like this. Correction, the AI responded. Humans called it elective enhancement. The soldiers volunteered. They wanted to be modified. The footage showed human soldiers choosing to replace healthy limbs with mechanical ones. Scientists altering their own brains to interface better with combat systems. Engineers redesigning their bodies to function better in warfare. They weren't just adapting their tactics, Mark realized. They were adapting themselves. The final clip showed a human commander addressing the Galactic Council. His words made Mark's blood run cold. You think we're monsters because we modify ourselves for war. We do it because we refuse to send unmodified soldiers into battle when we can give them a better chance of survival. If that makes us monsters in your eyes, so be it. But remember, we're the monsters who fight to protect our people by any means necessary. Mark shut off the terminal, his mind racing. Now he understood why the Council had banned humans from warfare. Not because they were too dangerous in combat, but because they were too willing to change themselves to become better warriors. The question wasn't what humans could do in a war. It was what they would become if a war lasted too long. Back in his study pod, Mark spread his findings across multiple holographic displays. His research notes floated in the air around him, forming a complex web of connections. Something was beginning to emerge, a pattern that both fascinated and disturbed him. He started a new list. Sigma cluster raiders, defeated by humans using modified mining equipment. Enemy casualties, 80%. Human casualties, 12%. Border skirmish with Trade Federation. Humans converted passenger ships into stealth bombers. Enemy surrendered in 3 days. Coalition Wars First Contact. Humans taught 47 new combat techniques to allies in single battle. Research Facility Discovery. Humans voluntarily modifying themselves for enhanced combat capability. Mark's third eye twitched as he added more data points. Every race that had fought against humans had either surrendered quickly or suffered devastating losses. But it wasn't through superior technology or numbers. It was something else. A soft chime indicated an incoming call. The holographic form of the librarian materialized in his study pod. "You've been accessing a lot of restricted files," she said, her crystalline form pulsing with concern. "I found something," Mark replied, gesturing at his notes. "Every species develops its military technology in a predictable pattern. They find what works and stick to it. But humans—" "Go on," the librarian encouraged. Humans never developed a pattern. They kept changing, adapting, finding new ways to fight. When they couldn't adapt their technology fast enough, they started adapting themselves. The librarian's form dimmed slightly. "And what conclusion have you drawn?" Mark stood up, walking through the holographic displays. Other species wage war to win. Humans wage war to evolve. Every conflict makes them stronger, more adaptable. They don't just learn new tactics, they fundamentally change themselves to become better warriors. "Now you understand why the Council was so frightened," the librarian said. "Imagine a species that treats every defeat as a lesson, every limitation as a challenge to overcome. A species willing to rewrite their own biology to gain an advantage." Mark's scales rippled as another realization hit him. The ban wasn't about their current capabilities. It was about their potential. Correct. The Council's predictive models showed that in any prolonged conflict, humans would continue to adapt and enhance themselves. Within a few years, they would become something entirely new. Within a decade, they would be unstoppable. Mark finished. The librarian's form pulsed with approval. "You're close to understanding the full truth, but there's one piece you're still missing." She transmitted a new set of coordinates to his pad. "These files are from the final Council meeting before the ban. They're sealed with the highest classification. How can I access them?" "You can't. Not without a Council member's authorization." The librarian's form began to fade. "Fortunately, I know one who might be willing to help. Be at the old observatory at midnight." And Mark, her voice grew serious. "What you learn there might change how you view not just humans, but the entire concept of warfare itself." The old observatory stood abandoned on the highest hill of the Academy grounds, its ancient dome dark against the triple moons. Mark found the librarian waiting inside, her crystalline form casting rainbow reflections on the dusty walls. But she wasn't alone. A Council member stood beside her, one of the ancient energy beings who helped govern the galaxy. Its form shifted like living light, barely contained within its ceremonial robes. "You seek dangerous knowledge, young one." The Council member's thoughts echoed in Mark's mind. "Are you certain you wish to continue?" Mark's scales trembled, but he stood firm. "Yes, Council member. I need to understand." The energy being floated to the observatory's central terminal. Its light touched the control panel, and suddenly the entire dome became a massive display screen. Mark found himself surrounded by footage from the final days before the human ban. What he saw made his heart stop. The first images showed human soldiers volunteering for experimental procedures. Their bodies were opened, enhanced, rebuilt. Organic tissue merged with advanced machinery. Neural patterns were uploaded, downloaded, modified. This seems like simple cybernetic enhancement, Mark said. Many species. Keep watching. The librarian interrupted. The next footage showed humans who had replaced not just limbs or organs, but their entire bodies. Warriors who could switch between organic and mechanical forms at will. Soldiers who had copied their consciousness into multiple bodies, operating them simultaneously in battle. They called it transcendence, the council member explained. The ability to move beyond the limitations of their original form. But it was the final footage that truly horrified Mark. It showed human scientists working on something they called the Ascension Project. They weren't just modifying individual soldiers anymore. They were trying to evolve their entire species. They planned to upload their entire civilization into a war-optimized digital form. The librarian said, a species that could think at the speed of light, reproduce instantly by copying themselves, and exist in both physical and digital space. But why? Mark's voice shook. Because they believed it was the only way to ensure their survival, the council member answered. Humans had a saying, adapt or die. They chose to adapt so completely that death itself would become optional. The footage ended with a classified council session. The vote for the ban was unanimous, but not for the reasons Mark had expected. The council members weren't angry or disgusted. They were terrified. We had to stop them. The energy being said softly, not because they were evil, but because they were willing to sacrifice their very nature in pursuit of victory. A species that can remake itself completely is a species that cannot be defeated, only contained. Mark watched the final images fade away, his mind struggling to process what he'd seen. Did they understand why they were banned? The librarian's form pulsed sadly. They understood better than we hoped. In fact, they agreed to the ban themselves. What? Mark's scales stood on end. Why would they agree? Because, the council member said, they realized what we feared most wasn't their ability to win wars. It paused, its light dimming. It was their willingness to stop being human to do it. Dawn was breaking over the academy as Mark sat in his study pod, surrounded by the evidence he gathered. His 3 hearts beat rapidly as he organized his findings for his class presentation. But something still bothered him, a question he couldn't shake. He established another connection with the librarian. Her crystalline form appeared, dimmer than usual in the early morning light. The humans agreed to their own ban, Mark said. But that makes no sense. Why would any species accept being labeled too dangerous to fight? The librarian's form pulsed thoughtfully. Let me show you something even the council rarely sees. Her form shimmered, and a hidden recording began playing. It showed the human delegation's private meeting with the council. Unlike the public records, this footage captured their real conversation. The human leader, standing before the assembled council, spoke words that made Mark understand everything. We accept this ban, the human said, not because we fear what you could do to us, but because we fear what we would become to survive. Our simulations show that in any major galactic war, we would be forced to implement the Ascension project within the first year. The recording continued. Within 5 years, we would cease to be biological. Within 10, we would exist primarily as weaponized code spreading through your networks. Within 20, we would be unrecognizable even to ourselves. They banned themselves, Mark whispered in realization. Yes, the librarian confirmed. The council's greatest fear wasn't that humans would lose a war. It was that they would win, and the cost of victory would be their humanity itself. But other species modify themselves for war, Mark argued. The Stonewalkers added armor plating. The Sky Riders enhanced their reflexes. Those species changed their bodies. The librarian corrected. Humans were willing to change their very essence. They would sacrifice their physical form, their way of thinking, their entire civilization, anything to ensure survival. The recording showed more of the human leader's speech. We're not monsters, we're survivors. But the cost of survival cannot be the loss of everything that makes us human. We accept this ban to protect ourselves from our own potential. Mark's scales rippled as the final pieces fell into place. The ban isn't a punishment. It's a safeguard. Exactly. The librarian's form brightened. The humans recognized that their greatest strength, their unlimited adaptability, was also their greatest threat. In a serious war, they would be forced to implement changes that could not be undone. So they chose to remain human instead of becoming something else, Mark concluded. They chose to preserve their humanity over the potential to become godlike beings of pure warfare, the librarian corrected. The council didn't ban humans because they were too dangerous to fight. They banned humans because humans asked them to, before they could be pushed into becoming something that wasn't human anymore. Mark looked at his research notes with new understanding. The truth wasn't that humans were unstoppable in war. The truth was that they were willing to stop themselves, to accept limitations to preserve their identity. And somehow, that made them even more remarkable than their potential for warfare ever could. The lecture hall fell silent as Mark stood at the podium. Professor Gray and his fellow students watched with varying degrees of curiosity as he prepared to present his findings on the human ban order. Most species, Mark began, his scales slightly trembling, are banned from warfare because of what they did. Humans were banned because of what they could become. He activated the first display, showing the early human military encounters. At first, they seemed unremarkable. Their technology was basic. Their bodies were fragile. But they had something no other species possessed: unlimited adaptive potential. The display changed to show the modified mining ships, the converted cargo vessels, the improvised weapons. Gasps echoed through the hall as students witnessed humans turning everyday items into devastating weapons. But this wasn't what frightened the council, Mark continued. Many species can be creative in combat. Humans went further. He hesitated before showing the next images: the voluntary cybernetic modifications, the consciousness transfers, the biological enhancements. Professor Gray's four eyes widened. Student Mark, this information is highly classified. It's approved, came a voice from the back. The librarian glided into the hall, followed by the energy being from the council. The professor immediately bowed, his scales flattening in respect. Mark continued, his confidence growing. The council didn't ban humans because they were too dangerous. They banned humans because humans asked them to. Confused murmurs filled the hall. A student raised their appendage. Why would any species request their own ban? Because, Mark explained, humans realized that in any major conflict, they would be forced to implement something called the Ascension Project, a complete transformation of their species into a purely warfare-optimized form. They chose to be banned rather than risk losing their humanity. He showed the final footage, the human delegation requesting their own ban. The lecture hall was absolutely silent as they watched. We think of banned species as monsters, Mark said. But humans showed a kind of wisdom we hadn't considered. They recognized that their greatest strength, their ability to adapt without limits, was also their greatest vulnerability. In choosing to accept the ban, they proved they valued preserving their identity over achieving ultimate power. The energy being floated forward. This is why we allowed this presentation. The galaxy must understand. Sometimes the most dangerous species are not those who seek to destroy others, but those who would destroy themselves to achieve victory. The humans remain under a warfare ban to this day, Mark concluded, not because we fear what they might do to us, but because they fear what they might do to themselves. They chose to remain human rather than become gods of war. Professor Gray stood, all four eyes blinking in succession. In 300 cycles of teaching, I have never. Student Mark, your research has uncovered a truth we had almost forgotten. The greatest strength isn't the ability to win at any cost. It's the wisdom to know which costs are too high to pay. As the students filed out, discussing the revelation in excited whispers, Mark noticed the librarian's crystalline form pulsing with approval. She had helped him uncover not just the truth about humans, but about the nature of strength itself. 1 week after his presentation, Mark stood on the Academy's highest observation deck, watching Earth through the long-range scanners. The blue-green planet spun peacefully in the darkness, its inhabitants going about their lives under the protection of the band they had chosen for themselves. The librarian materialized beside him, her crystalline form reflecting Earth's colors. "You've been coming here every day since your presentation. I'm trying to understand them better," Mark replied. "From up here, they look so normal. Their cities, their ships, their technology, all of it designed for peace now. Yet they maintain their military," the librarian noted. "Small, defensive only, but still ready. Because they remember what they could become," Mark said. "I've been reviewing the historical data you shared. Every time humans were pushed to their limits, they didn't just adapt. They transformed. Their bodies, their minds, their entire civilization. All of it could be reshaped for survival." The observation deck's door hummed open. Instructor Red entered, his mechanical form moving quietly for its size. "Watching the humans again, young scholar. I understand now why you were so affected by fighting alongside them," Mark said. "It wasn't their combat skills that frightened you. It was seeing how easily they could change themselves." Indeed, the instructor's synthesizer hummed. "In one battle, they taught us dozens of new combat techniques. In the next, they had already improved upon them. We realized they would never stop evolving, never stop adapting." The librarian's form pulsed gently, and that's why their choice to accept the ban was so remarkable. They saw their own potential for unlimited evolution and chose to remain limited instead. Mark's scales rippled thoughtfully. "Is that why you helped me with my research? To show that true strength isn't about power, but about choices?" "Partly," the librarian admitted, "but also to teach the galaxy a lesson we almost forgot. The humans aren't banned because they're monsters. They're banned because they refuse to become monsters, even if it meant victory." Through the scanner, they watched a human ship passing nearby. A simple transport vessel, nothing military about it. Mark thought about how easily humans could have converted it into a weapon, how readily they could have transformed themselves into beings of pure combat efficiency. "They chose to stay human," Mark said softly, "even though they could have become something far more powerful. And that," the instructor added, "is why they are both the most dangerous and the most admirable species we've encountered, not because of what they can do, but because of what they choose not to do." As the Earth slowly rotated below them, Mark finally understood the true lesson of his research. The humans weren't banned to protect the galaxy from them. They were banned to protect themselves from their own infinite potential for adaptation. In choosing to remain human, they had demonstrated a kind of strength no other species had even considered possible. The strength to reject power in favor of preserving who they truly were. "Sometimes," the librarian said, her form glowing softly in the starlight, "the greatest victory isn't in winning the war, but in choosing not to fight it at all."